I'm Sports Not, where we talk everything NFL, breaking stories, just about anything you want to talk about as it relates to the NFL. Of course, it's championship week, AFC, NFC coming up this weekend. We got the Ravens and the Chiefs. We have the 49ers and those Detroit Lions. Yes. Who's going to go to Las Vegas for the Super Bowl? Yep, that's who will decide. But also, let me remind you guys, check out sportsnot.com. We're going to have coverage of championship week all week up there. Great stuff. We got the top 10 best Chiefs teams of all time, top 10 Lions teams of all time, Ravens, 49ers, the players, everything. We're just going through just a fit covering these championship games and also the Super Bowl. So go check that out. Also, do us a favor if you're watching us on any of the channels you're watching us, whether you're watching us on YouTube, you're watching us on X, you're watching us on Facebook, do us a favor, like the page, like the video, subscribe, hit that notifications bell, especially on YouTube. So that way we ever are on live, you know that. But number two, you also will be notified every time we have new videos. We got a ton of videos coming up. We've upped our video game here. You guys see a lot of that. So make sure you do that. Also, make sure you follow Sportsnot on all the socials. Are you on TikTok? All right, we're there. Are you on IG? Great, we're there. Are you on Snapchat? Yes. I know I'm old enough to think that it was gone, but it's not. You can get us there. Facebook, everything.
Is it TikTok, or I thought you called it Tiki-Taki?
Tiki-Taki, yes. So I try to make fun of my own age at times and say that. Just like, remember when we were younger and Facebook came out, Ryan, and like your folks would say the Facebook? Yeah. So.
Oh yeah, that was great.
Yes,
yeah,
that's what we're trying.
I'm finally a dad now. My daughter's turning 4, so I live with dad jokes now. I love it. I'm like, what have I become?
Yes, you start to live dad jokes, and with my kids, I laugh at them and they don't. And then they say, Dad, you're not funny. I said, I think I'm funny, and that's all that matters. So there you go. But, and by the way, let us introduce ourselves. I'm Scott Branson. I am a writer, host, and editor at sportsnot.com, covering primarily the NFL, some other stuff too. And I am joined by my partner in crime here. He is Ryan Dyrud, the founder of the LA Football Network. He's on the left coast. I'm in the Midwest. And you can follow Ryan up on x.com at Ryan Dyrud, LAFB. Yes, with all those palm trees and the beautiful people. And then you can follow me at LV Gully. And of course, Sportsnot is at Sportsnot. All right, Ryan, we got a lot to talk about here, including the coaching carousel. It's still spinning, baby. It's still going. Bill Belichick, Jim Harbaugh, Vrabel, they're still out there. We'll talk about that in a minute. But we had breaking news right before we went on the air, and that is Vic Fangio, one of the most respected defensive coordinators, I think, over the last 20 years or so in the NFL. He announced that him and the Dolphins have parted ways amicably and mutually. And so now Vic Fangio, big defensive coordinator, is on the market. Rumors already have him going to Philadelphia, but there's other locations, Ryan. Where else could you see maybe Vic Fangio landing?
Yeah, I think they said it was just philosophical differences. So I don't know if that has to do with him being kind of an old school, old-minded coach, still one of the best in the business, and Mike McDonald being, just more of the upstart, fresh idea, less maybe strict, and so maybe it had to do with that. I don't know, but yeah, obviously Philly has an opening. I think Chicago he obviously spent a lot of time in Chicago. That's where he was before he got his head coaching job with the Broncos. So there's some thoughts there and able to give Eberflus kind of less defensive control and focus on being the head coach and focus on getting his offense right. So I could see that being a fit. We're going to see probably some other defensive coordinators, potentially one or two get hired, Raheem Morris in LA, that could be potential. What happens in Seattle? There's a lot of openings with Dallas. If Dan Quinn gets hired to maybe Seattle, does Dallas come calling? And Mike McCarthy says, hey, if I can go from Dan Quinn to Vic Fangio, that's not a bad fit. But I certainly think the Eagles are the front runner. The other one I'll just throw out there, but I don't see it happening at all. The Broncos, there was a lot of interest from Sean Payton to get Fangio back, which was so interesting as a head coach.
Yeah.
As a fired head coach. And then he ended up going with the other fired head coach, Broncos coach, and Vance Joseph. Now, Vance Joseph turn things around. His players absolutely love him, so I don't think they'll move on, and they turn that defense around substantially in the second half of the year. So I think that's set, but just something to put out there because there was interest before Peyton hired Vance Joseph.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. One of the jobs that people aren't talking about, I could see Fangio up there on the defense, depending on who the head coach would be, and that is Seattle. right? We haven't heard much about the Seattle position. We heard Dan Quinn a couple times. Obviously, he's got a history in Seattle because he was there, did some great work up there. And so we'll see what that'll happen. But it's crazy, the coaching carousel. I did an interview earlier today. You'll be able to catch up on Sports Not with Dallas Robinson from the Draft Network. And he was talking about the coaching cycle. And this is where we want to get into the Jim Harbaugh, Bill Belichick thing. And the amount of interviews that these NFL teams are doing with head coaches is off the charts compared. He talked about in previous year, he looked at the last 20 years, Ryan, and he found that on average, it was about 5 to 7 interviewees per team. And this year, if you back out the Raiders and the Patriots, of course, the Patriots had their head coach before the season even started last year. We didn't know that, but that's what happened. So they weren't even really on the market, so to speak. And then the Raiders did a couple sham interviews because they wanted to go with Antonio Pierce. So if you take them out, it's an average of like 11.4 interviews per team looking for a head coach. That's incredible. And you have to think about that, especially with some of the big names out there. Belichick is out there. We know he's been to Atlanta a couple times. We know Harbaugh has been to LA, was going back to Atlanta for a second. And we heard today, right afternoon, you and I were on a call with our editing staff, that he canceled that. So it looks like the Charger thing. What are you hearing, by the way, since you're the man on the ground and you guys have Los Angeles football covered better than anybody in the country? What are you hearing on Harbaugh now with the Chargers?
Last I heard, he's still here in LA. I don't know if that means he's in the facility down at Hogue facility in Costa Mesa, but was in LA. So it seemingly decided not to fly to Atlanta. Now that could still happen. At this point, it's just curious what the holdup is. I mean, I think there's no secret that the Chargers and Harbaugh are the marriage that is seemingly going to happen. That was back in December. That was back in October. That was the rumor that if say they didn't throw anything around, it was going to be Harbaugh or bust for the Chargers. So they've done the interview. They've done 16 interviews total. So they've checked all the boxes they need to do. So it's at this point, and you've heard rumors of they may be offering 15 to 18 million per year, which even if Michigan makes him the highest paid college coach, I don't even know if they'll hit that because the highest paid college, he'll be in that, 11, 12, 13 range. So he'd make more with the Chargers. So I don't know if it's a snag on GM hiring. I don't know if it's a snag on staff or if it's Harbaugh just continuing to kind of just play the field and, not knowing exactly what he wants and kind of just going back and forth. So, but as of now, Scott, he's in LA still. And if I'm the Chargers, if he leaves today without a deal, I would start to get a little worried.
Yeah. So that's what's interesting about that role is, what is he asking? There's not been any leaks so far, right? There's not been any agent leaks on the case of Yee, who represents Jim Harbaugh, to say, hey, he's asking for this and they're not giving it or whatever. You usually start to hear a little bit of those things pop out, right? Because either the team or the coach attempting to save face or to build some leverage will leak that to somebody in the media. So you have an idea, well, the holdup is Harbaugh wants that, or the holdup is the Chargers don't want to give a 4-year contract. They want to give a 3-year contract, whatever the holdup may be.
Yeah.
And so I wonder what it could be there. And I'm sure if you're Jim Harbaugh, let's take it from his side first. If you're him, you're saying, okay, number one is he does have the complexity of if the NCAA does find in the show cause some issues with Michigan that would have gotten him suspended in the NCAA. We know that the NFL, remember Jim Tressel, when he went from Ohio State, the NFL basically said, yeah, we're going to suspend you if you come here. The NFL's kind of played around that recently, hasn't really done it. So he might be working on some of that. The other thing is, Ryan, I want to get your take on this. Jim Harbaugh's 60. Now, I know Bill Belichick's 72 and all that, but he's already accomplished what he wanted to in the college game.
Yep.
He now wants to win a Super Bowl. So if he comes there, signs a 6-year deal, whatever it is, he's got to figure it's his last job, right? He's ready to try to get that championship at the NFL level and then maybe be done. So I'm sure he's trying to make sure whatever the financial piece, whatever the time piece is right for him so that he can make one big push to try to win that championship and then maybe ride into the sunset and enjoy the rest of his life.
Yeah, it certainly would seem to be that case, and why wouldn't you want that and not have to go seek something else and lock it up long term? And there's no in the NFL, it's different. Like buyouts are different. I mean, they're similar. They're just not called buyouts. You're basically guaranteed mostly your contract in the NFL. It's not like a buyout clause in college. So, he signs a 10-year deal, like he's basically guaranteed his whole contract. So seemingly, even if he only wants to coach 4 or 5 years, obviously retiring is different. But yeah, it's interesting that it's still not quite done yet. He has all the leverage in this situation. I mean, he's the queen of the dance, and so he can kind of pick his suitors who he wants. Obviously, we've talked about this at length, Scott, so we don't want to go in depth. Like, if he is truly eyeing a Super Bowl, and people can argue about the history of the Chargers and the organization, I totally get that. But if you're looking purely at the roster and the quarterback and who he's interviewed with, I think you have a much better shot with the Chargers right now than you would with, say, the Falcons, who have a lot of questions at quarterback. We'll need to go get one, unless he truly believes that JJ McCarthy is the next coming of Tom Brady, and we can go to Atlanta and have a top 15 pick and get JJ McCarthy and build his franchise around him there. So unless that's the holdup, and he's like, I don't know if I'm sold on Herbert versus this, which that would be silly to me. But at this point, all the cards on the table, and I think Chargers fans they're like, make Jack Harbaugh the GM, make his wife the OC. We don't care. Just get him here and get it done.
Yeah, it's interesting. And that's what I don't understand too. We've heard only Atlanta and Los Angeles, right? We haven't really heard anybody, and that might be him. He might just have selected, okay, here's the 2 places I want to go. One has a quarterback, one's probably going to try to get a quarterback. And so the situations are very different there. But there's been no interest that we could tell that we've seen. He has not interviewed with Washington. He has not interviewed with Seattle, some of these other open positions, obviously Carolina. And so it seems like he's down to 2. And so if he doesn't strike a deal with the Chargers or the Falcons, then does that mean he goes back to Michigan? I don't know. It's really interesting what's going to happen if those 2 things don't come together. It really seems like the Chargers thing is going to come together.
Yeah. What's hard too, Scott, and then I have one question for you, and we'll move on. I don't want to make this a full Chargers show, but thought, question, then we'll move to the next. What's interesting from the Michigan standpoint, I know this is more NFL focused, but he's not out on the recruiting trail right now. And all his players that he have recruited, they're in limbo. Like, is my head coach coming back? And so if I'm Michigan, I'm saying you got to give us a decision by like tomorrow, because, we cover USC out here. Lincoln Riley's been all over he's in Ohio right now. He's in your state right now, recruiting, building his program up. Coaches all over the country are out recruiting and getting ready for spring ball. And he's still kind of on his national title tour, then just doing these interviews in LA, getting wined and dined. And so if you're Michigan, you're like, you got to give us some clarity here too. We're trying to make you the highest pay, but we got to have a deadline here. So that's the other fabric of this, where it's like, he's kind of, I'm not trying to make him out to be a bad person by any means. He has the leverage and he should go get what he's deserved, but he's kind of stringing everyone along. And especially on college, that makes it a lot challenging, because Michigan will be way behind the 8 ball coming up into February. If they don't have a head coach, the recruiting class is all going to decommit. They're going to hit the spring transfer portal and not knowing who's going to be their coach. So a lot of factors at play there. I'll let you comment on that first, and then I'll ask my question.
No, listen, I don't think he's going back there. In fact, if he can't come to an agreement with LA or with Atlanta, I think he could sit out a year and just, why don't go do TV for a couple $1 million for a year, and then he can, go back next year. He'll still be in demand next year. So I think he can play that long game. I mean, I don't think he can be out of the game too long. He's not going to do a Gruden and be gone for 10 years, clearly at his age. But I could see that happening. I really think he'll end up working something out. But, shoot your question at me and we'll see what I have to say.
Yeah. So my if, and everything you just said, you won't believe this happened. I don't really either. But if for whatever reason it doesn't happen with the Chargers, and either he goes back to Michigan, I don't see any way he goes with the Falcons, but let's say he does. But in my opinion, if it's not the Chargers, it's either Michigan or, like you said, sit out and do TV maybe.
Yeah.
Who would be your then best choice for the Chargers? I know it'd be a letdown for the fans, but Pete Carroll has expressed interest in LA. Yeah. And like I said, they've interviewed 16 candidates all around the NFL. And obviously some of their favorites are still coaching in the playoffs right now. So those are candidates as well. So who would be yours, though, favorite if Harbaugh falls through?
Well, it's interesting because I think obviously the Chargers had trouble because they've not ponied up the money for a big coach, right? That's been part of the issue, and you've told me about that in the past as well. But now they appear ready to do that, clearly, because they're talking to Jim Harbaugh. So if he's not available, then who's left? Well, Dan Quinn's been there, right? I know he's a defensive guy, but he's been there. You talked about Pete Carroll, and you guys had a great story on LA Football Network about hip hop legend Snoop Dogg talking about the fact that Pete Carroll wants the job with the Chargers. So there's some big names. And I would imagine that the Chargers organization, they want to get a big name in there because they need to change that kind of trajectory, the view. They went with these 3 other coaches that were more unproven, even though they had great bona fides coming from defense and offense, all that stuff. But they need to, I think, do that. So that to me would be, I think, their direction.
Yeah. I agree. If somehow it doesn't happen with Harbaugh, to me, Vrabel's great. Dan Quinn's great. Ben Johnson, I know, is like fan favorite outside of Jim Harbaugh because of his offensive prowess. But to me, it's Pete Carroll. And my sole reason for it being Pete Carroll is not just the success that he's built, but it's more so, I mean, he is an LA icon for what he built at USC. You automatically put him on the sidelines. So far, you're going to have a lot of USC fans in that building rooting for Pete Carroll alone. So they get more on the map in Los Angeles with hiring Pete Carroll. Yeah,
and I remember a couple of years ago when you were on my Raiders show and we talked about the fan base for the Chargers in Los Angeles, how it had to grow, right? It was going to take a couple generations to do that. And you talked about the fact that the Rams and the Chargers both sort of, you had USC, you had the Lakers, right, for basketball. And then then the NFL teams came. So you're right. I think if you get a Pete Carroll in Los Angeles, that would be the second best option. I agree with you because then you get that personality and he is beloved in Los Angeles. He is such a great guy with the media. He fits perfect in the market. So it'll be interesting to see if they'd have it. Now let's talk about a guy who does not have a personality like Pete Carroll. And I'm bringing up sportsnaut.com here if you're watching us on the screen.
Nice.
But if you see this, up in the corner here, we have the story. It says Dallas Cowboys, Philadelphia Eagles reportedly were rejected by Bill Belichick before choosing to keep their head coaches. So that's the other guy we're talking about. And I know some people really don't care about Bill Belichick and the hoodie. I actually love his press conferences because they're funny. But you look at Bill Belichick and we hear his name, but then all of a sudden, and I always thought Dallas was going to be the perfect spot. And then they go ahead and they completely make me look like a fool because they keep Mike McCarthy. So you're starting to look at that and you think, wow, okay, so where's Bill Belichick going to go? Okay, the Falcons, he's met with them, hasn't met with the Commanders per se, or it wouldn't fit with the Commanders in my view. But nonetheless, there's that. And then what are we hearing recently in the last few days? We've been hearing Buffalo. I mean, can you imagine him back in the AFC East, Ryan, with Buffalo and Josh Allen?
Yeah, it'd be like the Rex Ryan saga, right? Even one AFC East team to the next. Obviously, a little more success rate. No, I mean it's interesting to hear. Great story that we have up on Sports Now, so check that out. But yeah, I mean you've got to be, obviously it's a results business, and so their head coach knows he's got to do better and whatnot. But it's got to be if they're reaching out and reportedly potentially have been reaching out to see if he'd be interested. That's tough for McDermott to, if he says no going into the season, knowing like, well, if Belichick would have said yes, I would have been replaced. I'm just kind of the second fiddle that's holding the seat, keeping the seat warm while they find my replacement. So, I mean, what do you think? Do you think that's a good? I mean, we know what he can do when he has a quarterback of extreme talent with Brady. So if he all of a sudden inherits Josh Allen in Buffalo, do they get that ring? What do you think?
I don't think so, because you look, Buffalo's got 25 impending free agents. They're massively over the salary cap. So as much as it's appealing as a story to say, hey, imagine Bill Belichick with another great quarterback, or at least a quarterback in the position to become great, i.e. Josh Allen. Wow, that would be amazing. But then you look, okay, who's he going to throw to? What defense is he going to have, right? Does Bill Belichick want to go somewhere? Now in Atlanta, I get it too. That's not exactly, they're not right there ready to win a championship, but they are better. They have some pieces in place. Not the quarterback, but Buffalo has the quarterback and they're not going to have any defense. So I wonder what he looks at. And I wonder too, again, does he sit out? Does he not have the opportunity he wants? So he says, I'll sit this one out. I don't know. It's really fascinating. And I know some people, I know he wants to come back though, Ryan, because he's heard the chatter, I'm sure. No matter how cool and collected he is, he's heard the chatter, well, you can't win without Brady. Yep. So what does he want to do? I think before he retires, he wants to show, no, I can win without Brady. Now, whether he wins a Super Bowl or not, I don't know. But even if he built a competitive team that went deep in the playoffs, I think it would answer a lot of questions. And so I think that's where he's at, but I have no clue. I have no good guess for where he may go.
Well, it's interesting that his market has not been as hot as everyone expected. Like everyone's like, okay, it's going to be him and Harbaugh kind of leveraging for almost every job. Harbaugh's interviewed with 2 teams. Again, I think that's more of his choice. He's saying no. And then Belichick, as you said no to the Cowboys and Eagles, but hasn't interviewed. And again, maybe it's his choice too. Like, don't want to go there. But it is interesting that it's such a small market. Again, whether it's his choice or the interviewer's choice. But yeah, I would not be shocked at all as things have progressed over the last 10 days if he's not in coaching this year. And then maybe next year, if, I'm trying to think off the top of my head of a coach that would enter the hot seat in the next year, that he could maybe one of the Florida teams, go to a nice temperate zone in Florida. If Todd Bowles decides to retire, or you've heard, down in Miami, even though it seems kind of crazy, but it seems like there might be his seat may be warm. I'm not saying I believe with that, or if what happened with Doug Peterson in Jacksonville, so I don't know, but maybe he does it out of here.
It's a crazy business, man. I mean, you just never know. And guys, I thought Nick Sirianni in Philadelphia would be gone. I know he was in the Super Bowl last year, but the way that team collapsed is really, really bad. And so, of course, he had to get rid of his entire staff to keep his job. And so now we'll see what happens there. But the last thing I wanted to say on the head coaching thing is it's really interesting because if you go back several years, remember how we would have retread coaches. So, Mike Shanahan would get fired in Denver. Then he would go to Washington. He'd go to this. He'd go to wherever he'd go all the way around. And then they would exhaust it after a while. It's okay. Now you're done, dude, because you've been to 5 different spots in 10 years and you can't refine that winning formula. It seems like that's happening less. And not only that, but you see coaches who've been moderately successful and haven't failed in multiple areas, like Mike Vrabel, not able to. The league is now such an offensive league, Ryan. And you mentioned one of the hottest names out there, which is Johnson from Detroit. And you look at that and you say, okay, so now NFL owners, right? They're the ones who do this, GMs, front offices. They're no longer saying, I'm going to put stock in somebody as much because they've been a head coach before. We're going to instead put stock in, are they progressive offensively? Or if they're a defensive coach, do they have the relationships to bring in somebody who can be that way? They want designers. They don't want scheme people. They want people like Mike McDaniel. Whether he's going to be successful as a head coach or not, we'll see. But the reality is they're going in different directions. So somebody like Mike Vrabel, if this was 10 years ago, he would have been hired on day 2.
Yep.
But it seems like the NFL really wants that next bright mind coming through the system.
Yeah. I mean, Mike, and you said it, Mike McDaniel. I said earlier, I think I called him Mike McDonald. That's the DC for Baltimore. Too many Mike Mix, but Mike McDaniel, perfect case study, right? Wasn't even OC, gets a head coaching job, or was like a pseudo OC, but he didn't call the plays in San Francisco. You see with Bobby Slowick right now, coming from San Francisco, first year OC in Houston. He's gotten some interviews. They've cooled a little bit. Tennessee seemed like the place where he may have gone. And they obviously just hired, which we haven't even talked about. They just hired Brian Callahan.
From
the offensive coordinator from Cincinnati, who's, a bright young mind. So yeah, that definitely seems, and it kind of, trends in a way, Scott. I always like on some of my shows, I compare sports to like the business world. And it seemed like in years past, and still some of the big ones still do this, but in years past, it was always like, we got to go out and get that established CEO to run our company, especially if you're a startup. Like, we're going to go and hire Steve Ballmer from Microsoft to run what we're doing here because he's been established. He's done that. And now a lot of businesses, again, I'm not talking about Disney or these big ones, but a lot of startups, a lot of the smaller ones are getting the new upstart leaders that maybe haven't built that resume, but they have a fresh way of thinking.
Yes.
And the NFL certainly seems to be following that way of thought. I don't think the NBA is there yet. The NBA seems to really retread coaches. I mean, Doc Rivers just got his 10th coaching job or whatever
with the Bucks.
Yeah,
yes,
crazy.
Who fired their coach with a great record. It's crazy.
30-13 and fired your coach and go hire a guy that's on his whatever team. But the NFL, I think, and for good or bad, this is a whole debate that everyone can have. I'm not saying one way or the other, but they seem to have now said, okay, we need to go after these bright new thinkers instead of the old way of thinking that has been established. So it's, it's kind of refreshing, I guess. And it does keep at least the coaching pool. I'm not talking bad about old coaches, but it's a tough business to get into, and you kind of want to see more opportunity for guys instead of just the same 20 coaches throughout the league over and over and over again.
Yeah. And I think you look to how it started to snowball. And I think you look at Sean McVay, right? I think that's where it kind of started.
Yep.
And it started going that way. And since that point, and also you think about it too, from even a guy who's sought after, a young offensive or defensive coordinator. D'Amico Ryans obviously was on the defense. They are going to, even if they're in high demand, they're going to be cheaper than Jim Harbaugh.
Yep.
They're going to be cheaper than Bill Belichick. Okay.
Yep.
So yes. And so you have risk both ways. I was trying to talk to Raiders fans about this when they were talking about the coaching situation there. And it's like, well, we get this high price coach and he's going to fail. Well, you can get the inexperienced guy too, and he may fail. The reality is they all can fail. Nobody's perfect. Nobody does everything successfully their entire lives. So, but I think teams, NFL teams now are looking like, hey, we might catch fire in a bottle. We might catch the Sean McVay. We might catch the D'Amico Ryans. We might catch one of these guys who can take us to that next step and is going to think differently. I think you're absolutely right about that, because owners see it. They live and breathe the game. They see how offenses change, how defenses change, and they see some of these. Now, Vic Fangio stayed on it pretty good. So we talked about an older coach earlier.
Yeah.
But in most cases, you've got to keep up with where the game is going, like what we saw early in the season from Miami's offense. And so that's why I think some of these teams are going with these young coaches. So it's going to be fascinating to see how this works out. Go ahead.
Real quick, last question on that. We talked about this on our Rams show yesterday. Shameless plug. Check out the Rams Skinny. Any Rams fans out there on the LA Football Network. But and I haven't looked at the numbers yet, so maybe we can get our good guy Matt Johnson at Sportsdot, who's like our numbers guru, to look into this. But seemingly a lot of successful hires on the offensive side of the ball. You know, everyone talks about it's either the OC or like the QB coach that gets promoted, right? That's like kind of the linear model of promotion. But the success rate of tight end coaches, I think, is actually a lot higher than people probably think. Now, I haven't looked at the numbers, so I'm kind of spitballing here. We brought it up yesterday. If you think about Sean McVay was a tight end coach, then became the OC, then became the head coach. Dan Campbell was a tight end coach, also former tight end. Frank Smith was a tight end coach. Now he's the OC, but not calling plays, but he's a hot candidate. So because the tight end coach and the tight end, and you see Greg Olson, who I think is one of the best color commentators in all of football, tight ends and tight end coaches have to know, and QB, obviously the QB too, so I'm not downplaying the QB and the QB coach, but less known, but more involved. The tight end coach has to know what the offensive line is doing, what the running backs are doing, what the quarterback is doing, and what the tight end is doing. So in reality, the tight end coach and the tight end are knowing, outside of the quarterback, they know more of the offensive playbook and the scheme and what everyone needs to do than any other position coach on that side of the ball. So I wonder if we'll start seeing more tight end coaches get elevated quicker, because I know the Rams tight end coach is getting interviewed for an OC job right now, and we're seeing others out there, and that success rate. Arthur Smith was a tight end coach, and obviously he didn't pan out as a head coach, but he was a good OC when he moved up. So I wonder if we'll start seeing more of that. I don't know your thoughts on that.
That's fascinating. I didn't know that. I appreciate it. I'm gonna look into that now too. So because that's a fascinating discussion just to see where they come from, because a lot of times you get the argument of, well, is it a defensive coach, is it an offensive coach, but you don't really talk about what part of the offense they came from. So that'll be interesting. It's fascinating. All right, well, let's move off the coaching carousel now, because we're getting dizzy, and talk about the championship games coming up this weekend. I mean, Ryan, to me, you got on the NFC side, we'll start with that one. You got the 49ers hosting the Lions. You talked about Dan Campbell, one of the great stories in the NFL over the last couple years. And of course, the Lions, I think a lot of people, if you're probably east of the Mississippi, you're going to be cheering for the Lions, right? Unless you're an NFC North a foe and you don't like the Lions. Other than that, I think it's one of those kind of feel-good stories about Detroit people want to see extended and see that lovable. It's like the Cubs when they went to the World Series, right? People wanted them to win just because it'd been so friggin' long. And I think that's the case with the Lions. But they're going into San Francisco. Again, I always reiterate, San Francisco's got the deepest roster. Doesn't mean they always win, but the deepest roster. We don't know the status of Deebo Samuel yet. Their offense is much different with him in there. It's much more explosive, even though they still have a ton of weapons like Christian McCaffrey and Brandon Ayuk. But when you look at this game and you see Detroit going out there, do you see an opportunity for Detroit to go out there and steal that one and get to the Super Bowl? Or do you think San Francisco at home is just going to be too tough?
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing. Like, I want to, we try to keep it professional here, obviously, but we can let our fan things slide out. I'm rooting for the Lions, and I love their story, and Jared Goff being an LA Ram out here in LA. We covered him. He was a great guy to cover, always great with the media. And obviously the Niners are a big rival of the Rams, and they've kind of built this all in, but they're a very good football team. It's the thing is Jared Goff's 3-6 against the Niners. He's 0 in his last 4, I believe. Obviously dating back to his day with the Rams when they played twice a year. So seemingly could never get over the hump once the Niners got relevantly good after their, bad years before Kyle Shanahan kind of after his first 3 years, then rebuilt. So that worries me. They know how to beat him. Kyle Shanahan knows how to beat him. I know Steve Wilkes wasn't the coordinator when he was LA, but there's still the organizational structure that was there. So kind of like what I said on our show when the Rams played the Lions, like the Rams know how to beat Jared Goff, and they did in the second half. And the Lions still came out on top. Great, kudos to them. But the Rams kind of did everything in that second half to have an opportunity to win. Niners just have a lot more firepower. Now, that being said, we've been saying this a lot on our show. We did it when we previewed Bucks Lions. Same goes for kind of the Niners philosophy here. If the Lions and Aaron Glenn send a lot of blitz pressure on Brock Purdy, then I think they have a really good shot to win this game. And obviously a lot will come down to Debo. We have a great article up on SportsNaut about kind of what the Niners winning percentage and their statistics are with and without him, as you alluded to. But to me, it comes down to getting after Brock Purdy, not giving all day to throw. And then on top of that, and I'm getting long-winded, so back to you. It also comes down to Kyle Shanahan and his play calling. Does he use Christian McCaffrey like he should as arguably the best skill position player in all of football? Or does he run him 11 times through 3.5 quarters and make Brock Purdy throw 30 plus? So it's going to come down to the Lions getting blitz pressure and Kyle Shanahan calling a smart, methodical game with his best player. So I don't know what will happen, but that's kind of the breakdown I see.
Yeah, no, put very well. And I think, this one interests me. I'm going to give the 49ers the edge there just because they're at home. But at the same time, like I see as good as that Niner defense can be, boy, I like the way Detroit runs the ball. And I think if Detroit can really make inroads there and keep the pressure, I mean, you got to keep the pressure off Goff. We know Goff is around 76% completion percentage when he's not pressured. When he's pressured, it's around 50%. It's always going to be lowered when you're pressured, of course, but his is a big drop off, right? But you mentioned it. He's going home. He's a Bay Area boy. He's from Nevada, right? So he's going home. He's got some extra oomph, and you're right. He hasn't beaten the 49ers. It's been a long time. Not a good record against them. But I think it's going to be closer. Our managing editor over at SportsNaut, David Kuhl, and I did a video, and he said that it was going to be like 28-22, something like that. I actually think that this game could be a little bit lower than that, and I think it could be closer than that. I think it could be closer. To me, there's not going to be in between. It's going to be closer, or the 49ers are going to win by 10 or 14 points. Like I just see the Lions. If the Lions can stay in it, and like you said, if they can make Brock Purdy throw the ball too much and Kyle Shanahan throws the ball too much, then I think they have a better shot. And if they can establish that run and be really successful with it, because I love Jahmyr Gibbs, and then you got Montgomery, the veteran, with him as well. You got that two-headed monster, and it's worked pretty well. The thing with the Lions here, Ryan, and see if you agree with me on this, the Lions, to me, to have any shot against the 49ers, have got to play mistake-free football.
Yep, 100%. Mistake-free, and then also I think they got to get out to a lead early. I mean, that's obvious. It seems like common sense, but when you look at the Niners, what was the stat now after last game? Shanahan's 1-35.
1-31 when down by 7 points in the fourth quarter. Yeah.
In the fourth quarter. So against the Rams, Lions scored 3 touchdowns on their first 3 possessions. Against the Buccaneers, they got off to a quick start as well. And so if they can get off on quick, which will absolutely, from what I've seen, will make Kyle Shanahan call a one-dimensional game and make Purdy throw. Even if he's only down 3, all of a sudden they don't run the ball anymore with CMC. And I like their shot. If the Niners jump, or if the Niners jump out early, it's going to be, I think, a tough uphill climb, because then they can just send Bosa and Chase Young with the ears pinned back.
Yeah, it's really perplexing to me, Ryan, that you talked about Christian McCaffrey. Christian McCaffrey, there's a good argument for Christian McCaffrey to be the MVP. Okay. Yeah. It's going to be Lamar Jackson. We know that, and he deserves it. But I would say he has a good argument. But it blows my mind how many times I have seen Shanahan give it to McCaffrey. McCaffrey starts to gain steam, starts to do well, and then they just completely abandon the run. It's crazy when you have that ability in that player and you do that. I don't understand it. If he does that against the Lions, I think that's a big opening for them. I would imagine he wouldn't, but to your point, things get tight, and you know what else gets tight? People get a little nervous, and they start panicking a little bit, no matter how many championship games he's been in. And so to me, that's where the Lions, you're right. The Lions have to be disruptive, and they got to get off to that early start. It's important to run the ball. It's important for Jared Goff to be on target and to really get that offense going, so that the pressure, because if they don't do that, then the pressure's all still on them. You put the pressure on the 49ers offense, I think that's where you start to chip away at it and have a shot.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's, I think, the key to the recipe for success for them. And yeah, it's funny because I know you have thoughts on Mike Shanahan, but who kind of founded this Shanahan offense that we always talk about. And obviously now it's, Kyle's, but it goes down to McVay has a version of it, Mike McDaniel, for all these different variations of the Shanahan offense. And it was first predicated on the zone run, like the zone run scheme, which they still all run. McVay actually switched to a gap run scheme this year, which I thought was great with Kyren Williams, but Shanahan still runs his own scheme. That's why we've seen in years past, no-name running backs, no disrespect, have a lot of success. Now he has this Ferrari, and he just wants to throw the ball all the time. And that's no disrespect to Brock Purdy, but I don't care what your argument on Brock Purdy is. I think he's played very well. I'm not knocking him at all, but he's not Josh Allen. He's not Justin Herbert. He's not Joe Burrow. Like, he's a good, solid quarterback. Why try to make him be Joe Burrow or Josh Allen? Let him be Brock Purdy, which is, hey, let's just play within the system, run the football with the best player in football that we have, and let our defense that we've put all this money into, we traded for Chase Young, we got Nick Bosa, we got Eric Armstead, we got all these guys, let them do their thing, and let's not go behind the 8 ball by throwing at 35. I don't get it.
Well, it's weird when you bring that up too, because I see it. The NFL was such a copycat league, and people, it's like groupthink sometimes. As creative as some of these guys are, and they're different, and they're doing different stuff, and they should be credited with that. You saw it in Buffalo with McDermott against the Chiefs. They're running the ball well, and then they stop running the ball. Now, I get it. The offenses are different. You're going more aggressive. There's more passing. That's all cool, and that's the way it is, and that's fine. But when you're successfully doing it, opens up the big play downfield. Look, I think Josh Allen had 39 attempts, and the longest, and he had 159 yards or 152 yards. And that's because they weren't getting anything downfield, because to me, they abandoned the run. Same thing happens in San Francisco, which is they abandon the run, and then it's dink, dunk, and that's fine. You can sometimes win that way, but it takes away the explosiveness, because I think all these guys, they're like, okay, we've done that. Now we got to go downfield, and we got to get the big plays and the big chunk plays. But you don't get those big chunk plays unless you loosen up the middle, and you do that by running.
Yeah. I want to see, Scott, one time, not in the playoffs, probably a little too risky, but I want to see one game where a coach says, you know what? We are going to run the ball every play until we either fall down low, like fall behind, like it's just we're not having success because it's coming, or whatnot. But like, if you're averaging 4 yards a clip, that's a first down every 3 plays. So I'm like, I want to see a coach just say, we're going to literally run the ball down.
But didn't the 49ers, the 49ers had to do that last year, remember? Because they lost Purdy to the injury.
Yeah.
Hand off. Now, that was a different situation, but yeah, no, I mean, look, I know the game has changed. The days of the golden age of running backs is gone. That's why they don't make the big money anymore. But at the same time, you still have to have balance in the offense. I mean, you look at Baltimore, same thing. Yes, they don't have a big name running back per se. It's Lamar Jackson, actually, but they do it. They balance it out. And so I think that's what you have to do. So if San Francisco doesn't do that, I think they're opening themselves up to get upset. Now, what does your gut tell you? Who wins the game?
So I'm going to go Lions just because that's what my heart tells me. My gut still says Niners. I just think at home with the talent they have. But I'm going to pick just on, so we're live on air. I'm going to pick the Lions. I just think it's their season. It's a Cinderella story. It's so great. I was talking, a buddy of mine on the LFB, he predicted Lions Ravens in the Super Bowl back in like October. I think I've told friends that as well, maybe not live. So I'm going to stick with that.
All right, there you go. I'm going to take the 49ers. I'm taking the easy way out. I think at home, I think it's going to be close though. I really do think it's going to be a close game and a really good game. So that's good. All right, we'll switch to the AFC side here to get the final parts of the show here. Man, this game, you're talking about Mahomes versus Jackson, right? It's like a Rocky movie. You have these two premier names at quarterback. You want to argue the best two quarterbacks in the NFL. I still put Mahomes number one. I'm a huge, and full bias up front, I'm a huge Lamar Jackson fan. Love Lamar Jackson. Have always loved Lamar Jackson. But I do think Mahomes is the kind of gold standard. But you look at these guys and what they're able to do with their teams, and how Lamar Jackson has matured into this quarterback. And the matchup here, the top two defenses, right, in the NFL, and these two quarterbacks. It's like two freight trains on the same track running at one another. I have no idea how the Chiefs attack that defense, and I have no idea how the Ravens are going to do against a really young and a really good defense, especially in the secondary. So Lamar Jackson, is he going to run a lot? And if he does run a lot, does that open him up to perhaps not being as effective? Yeah, he can run the ball, but I think they're going to have to pass the ball too to win. Man, I just don't. This thing is going to be, just to me, a knockdown drag out.
Yeah, I think this is a harder game to even predict a little bit than the other one we just talked about, because you have a Chiefs team that is seemingly down this year. Obviously, offensive weapons, we talked about ad nauseum, but you mentioned the defense is playing unbelievable, and it's still Pat Mahomes. So you have the two factors you truly need to win a championship. You have a defense, and you have an all-pro style quarterback, not this season, but in general. Right. And you have the Ravens that top to bottom are just a better team. I mean, they're the better team top to bottom, but like, how do you really call it? So, even with the coaches, it's hard to call. Like John Harbaugh and Andy Reid, two of the best in the business. I mean, John Harbaugh is one of the most, I don't know if you can still say underrated, but certainly every year when people talk best coaches, he's not like top three that people say. I would argue he is. I mean, the guy doesn't lose. He hasn't won a championship since Joe Flacco in that Super Bowl 48 against the Niners, but he doesn't lose. Mm-hmm. And he makes the playoffs every year. And so this is a tough one to predict. I think it's going to come down to who makes the big mistake, probably, and who capitalized on that mistake. We saw last week Buffalo made the mistake on the fake punt, but then the Chiefs fumbled through the end zone, so it kept them alive. Had they put that in, the game would have been over right then, probably. So will that happen in this one? Yeah. We've seen the Ravens throughout this year, Scott, capitalize on those mistakes. I hate always bringing back the LA teams, but it's just easier because I watch everything against the Rams. The Rams let them tie the game on the last drive, and then they win in overtime on a punt return. So it's like they've capitalized on bad execution from other teams, and they've done it all year long. So they're another team like the Lions. I feel like this is their destiny this year. It just feels like all signs point. They've blown out good teams all year, well coached, and they feel like it. But this is a close one, and it's still Mahomes.
Yeah. And see, that's where I'm at. Like I said, I love Lamar Jackson. And really, it's funny because people are like, why doesn't Lamar Jackson get any credit? And everybody's always second guessing him. It's like, dude's about to win his second MVP. How are people second guessing him?
Yeah.
But I will say this, just like you heard with Josh Allen after he lost to the Chiefs again. And that is, you got to win the big game. You got to win the big game. And so the only thing that Lamar Jackson hasn't done is win a Super Bowl. Patrick Mahomes has done it, right? Yep. And so I think that's the thing missing. So I think he's going to be extra motivated. And of course, playing in Baltimore is tough. The weather's going to actually be good. The weather back here is warmed up. It was 50-some degrees here today, which is very, very warm for this time of the year.
Yeah, we're 50 out
I know,
here.
man. We were outside with suntan lotion. It was great. But you look at that and you say, okay, so Lamar's got his, he's got to have a chip on his shoulder because he's like, okay, yeah, I got to win the big game. But then you're right, Mahomes. So it's hard for me, and I don't mean from a wagering standpoint, but it's hard for me to bet against Mahomes because it just seems like the guy pulls out a rabbit out of the hat every freaking time he finds himself in the position. So to me, I think one of the keys, even though I think it's going to be a really close game because these defenses are so good, to me, it's going to be who gets out to that fast start. If Baltimore, especially Baltimore, because they have the better offense, like you said, they have the better team all the way around. If they get out offense and they can start to demoralize that Chiefs defense, especially early, and start to get plays and score, then I think it's very easy for Baltimore to start to, I don't think they'll blow them out per se, but I think you could get into a position where you can start to play the clock. You can start to play field position once you get into the second half, since you're at home, and win that game. So I think that's what they're going to have to do. The other thing is, what are the Chiefs going to do offensively? Like, again, the Chiefs, I know what we've heard about their offense. They're down. And yes, they're 15th in scoring, I think number 9 overall. So it's still a top 10, top 15 defense. It's not terrible. Yeah. But when the Chiefs have been in the top 5 for the last 5 years, you kind of look at it and say, okay, but what are they going to do? Because the Ravens are going to do everything they can. I know it sounds easier said than done to shut down Travis Kelce. Okay. Yep. So then you have Rashee Rice. Then what? What are you going to do? You're going to have to attack that Ravens defense. And Ryan, I got to tell you, I just don't see how the Chiefs successfully attack that defense enough to win the game.
Yeah, I don't either. I mean, I think Mike McDonald's done a phenomenal job. Obviously, a top head coaching candidate also. And it's just such a talented defense. I mean, what they did, I know they added him, 2 off seasons ago, but Roquan Smith, that linebacker, has been absolutely fantastic. That defensive front, the secondary, I mean, they're top to bottom. They're great. They're going to bring pressure, and they can do it with just the front 4. And so they can keep guys back. And when you don't have top end receiver talent like the Chiefs, who's going to get open? I mean, who's going to really do it? Yeah. And they play smart, savvy defense too. And I don't think they're going to, we've seen a lot of teams. And again, I don't like to pretend like I'm smarter, but it doesn't make sense to me when a defense plays zone on the Chiefs, because Travis Kelce's going to pick apart the zone. I don't think the Ravens will do that, and they'll stick to more man or more disguised looks that will force them to go elsewhere besides Kelce's. So I don't see how they do it either. And let me ask you this, Scott, going back to Lamar Jackson, just for the sake of kind of debate and argument. And this isn't directed at you saying this at all. But just your opinion, because and we've talked about this on meetings and off air with, Sportsnet guy. I can't remember if there was an article up or not, but there's always this conversation or even just poignant statement of player X can't win the big game. And seemingly this is about Lamar Jackson, but that goes into Josh Allen and whatnot. In your opinion, and then I'll say mine, but like, you take out Mahomes, what other quarterback are you putting in his place that does win the big game consistently? If you take out Mahomes, I mean, there's since 2006? I'm making up the year a little bit, but a long time that there hasn't been a man, or it's been Manning, Brady, and Mahomes in the AFC Championship since 2006. 3 quarterbacks, 2 are retired. So out of the 32 starters, you take out Mahomes, like, who do you trust more than Lamar Jackson? Like, who? Yes. So I just hate that that's like an argument nationally of like, well, he can't win the big game. It's like, well, okay, who else is winning the big game? There's one guy in the league right now that does it consistently. That's it. That's the list. So I mean, just your thoughts on that.
It's a great point, because I do think you're right. I mean, look, and on the AFC side, especially, who is it? There is nobody. Lamar Jackson is the only other guy. Like, because people say, okay, well, if you want to start your team tomorrow, would you start with Mahomes or Jackson? And I say Mahomes just because of what he's done. Now, if Mahomes isn't an option, like you said, then it's got to be Jackson, because there's nobody else. Now, I know there's some young quarterbacks came in the league. We saw CJ Stroud. We saw some of these guys come in and do really well, but they're not there yet, right? They haven't won anything. They haven't won one playoff game. Stroud won 1 playoff game. But other than that, I think you're right. I think that's why I don't understand that kind of, but he hasn't won the big game. And it's true. But Dan Marino never won the Super Bowl either. And he's one of the best quarterbacks, if not the best quarterback to ever play the game outside of Tom Brady. And so you look at that, and winning is, a lot of people will argue with you, right? Winning is not a quarterback stat. It is and it isn't, right? It's about elevating your team. So I think that's what Patrick Mahomes has done. Not only is he a great athlete and a great physical quarterback as an athlete, but he also elevated his team at the right moments, which helped the win. Okay, it's not a quarterback stat, but the right quarterback can elevate everybody so that the team wins. And I think that Lamar Jackson has the ability to do that. And if he does it in a big game like this against the Chiefs, and then he wins a Super Bowl, then that's put to bed forever. And then you could start to argue, okay, well, he's only got 1 Super Bowl compared to Mahomes 2. But man, the level starts to get more even with Patrick Mahomes.
Yeah. And that was the argument against Matthew Stafford, right? And then he 2 years ago won the Super Bowl, and it's all about team sport. Obviously, being a quarterback, you get paid more, you get more pressure, but it comes down to who your team is. And the only other quarterback I think you could even argue with would be Joe Burrow, but Joe Burrow has been injured 2 of 4 years in the league.
Can't stay healthy.
The 2 years he's been healthy, went to a Super Bowl and an NFC Championship game. So those are pretty remarkable numbers for those 2 years. But his other 2 years he was hurt, and so you got to be available in order to do that. And obviously they missed the playoffs this year probably because of that. So I put Lamar Jackson right there. And I know that'll be a knock, especially if he loses this game. That'll be the conversation. But, sometimes it's, when you look at the greats, right? Like I'm trying to think of one right off the top of my head, but during like Tom Brady's years, it was
Mhm.
so hard for, Rivers and Roethlisberger and all these guys to finally break through. Rivers never did. Roethlisberger did. Well, Roethlisberger actually broke through early and then went through a dry spell.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
sometimes there's just that one guy you can't get past. Manning, it took forever to get past. And
Yeah.
so,
Elway.
Elway, well, I mean, Elway didn't win a Super Bowl till his 15th season, but he went to 4.
Exactly.
That's why, to me, he's
Exactly.
my favorite quarterback because he took poo-poo teams to 4 before winning 2 at the back end of his career with the great teams. So I just
Yeah.
think there's too much of downplaying great quarterback play just because one guy is better. Doesn't mean Lamar
Yeah.
Jackson isn't a clutch performer.
No, exactly. And I do expect it just feels to me like this is his year. Again, hard for me to go against Mahomes just because of what he's done, not because I'm rooting for them to win. Like I said, I'm a Lamar Jackson fan. I'd like to see him in the Super Bowl and see how he performs there. So we'll see how it all rolls out. But I just think in this one, I got to go with the home team too. I know I'm playing it safe, picking both home teams, but I think this one will be closer as well. But I think Lamar Jackson is going to be the difference. I think with his legs combined with his arm, the fact that they're going to not only be able to run the ball with him, but I think you also have Isaiah Likely there as well, and you have that receiving core with Zay Flowers now energy to it. I think they're able to just do that, and I think they're going to take this game. I think it's going to be a field goal game, but I think they'll win it.
Yeah, if I believe in the script, if I believe in the conspiracy that the NFL has a script, Kansas City's winning this game because they need
Yeah.
Taylor Swift in that Super Bowl.
Oh, I forgot about
They
that.
need T Sizzle.
Wow.
They need T Sizzle in
T-Sizzle.
that Super Bowl suite in
Oh my
Vegas
goodness.
with all the lights in
Yeah.
Vegas with T Sizzle, Jason Kelsey. They
Yeah.
need him in that Allegiant Stadium out in Vegas. If I don't believe the script, Baltimore's winning this game because they're a better football team. They're just playing better and they're playing, remarkably. When you look at the numbers, one of the greatest teams you could argue of all time, especially if they go on to win it, or really
Yeah.
only if they go on to win it. So heart and what I believe is the Ravens, but if you believe the script, it's going to be the Chiefs.
Got to get Taylor Swift to the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
Imagine
Got it.
that. Oh boy. Does that mean Jason Kelsey's going to be shirtless in Vegas?
He better be.
He won't be the
I'll
only
be
one
out there,
because
so I'll
it
be
is
looking
Las
for him.
Vegas.
Yeah, I'll fit right in. It'd be great.
Yes, you're gonna be on Podcast Row, right? So we'll end up. I think that week, if you're there on Wednesday, we'll do the show with you from there. It'll be
Yes,
fun.
we'll be live from Radio Row in Vegas. So it'll be a
love
great
it.
time. I was hoping you could have made it out, but we'll do it remote still, and we'll be
Yes.
out there and have some fun.
We get to tear up Indianapolis together for the combine. That's what
Yes.
we'll do. So that'll
Can't
be
wait.
fun. All right. Well, so we both, you got the Lions. I had the 49ers. We both have the Ravens in the AFC game. So we'll see. By the way, we will be live after the game. We're going to do that again. Right.
Yeah,
So,
that's fun.
we're going to do that after the is the AFC Championship the late game? Yeah, isn't it? No, it's the NFC's late. I can't remember.
I think
NFC because it's West Coast.
I can double check while.
Yes. So there you go. See, I can't keep track of the schedule anymore. Now that there's not 40 games, you'd think you could keep track of it, but when there's only 2,
Yeah,
it seems like
the NFC game is the 3:30 Pacific time start.
Okay, good. So yeah, so we'll be live after the game here talking about it. So join us, and we certainly appreciate everybody joining in to talk NFL here on the NautZone. Do me a favor, also make sure you follow Ryan up on x.com at Ryan Dyrud LAFB. Check out LAFB as well. Check out the Los Angeles Football Network. Great stuff there, whether a USC fan, UCLA fan, Rams, Chargers, Cal State Fullerton. No, that's not football. Okay.
It's my rival. I went to Long Beach State. No Fullerton stuff here.
Oh, you're a 49er.
Yeah, 49er.
Does that kill you that you're a 49er from college and the 49ers are
It does. What's funny, and I won't go long on this, but they actually, for whatever, there was some political reason after I graduated, they changed their mascot to the Sharks now.
No, they did not.
Yeah, apparently Prospector Pete was offensive.
Oh boy.
So they're now they're the Sharks.
Yes.
And the baseball team's still the Dirtbags.
Dirtbags, yes. And I did actually called on radio when I was working at UNLV and in college too. Called some games out there. So
nice.
It's
Blair Field, baby. Beautiful.
Yes. Beautiful field, great field. And then back in the day, Ryan, I'm so old. We used to go to the Big West tournament at the Long Beach Arena.
Yep.
And the Mountain West media suite where they would like have beer and wine for people and stuff. I remember going, and the great Lawrence Fan, who since passed away, he was the SID at San Jose State. we walk in and they're like, oh, okay, come on in. It's the hospitality suite, right?
Yeah.
And it's like beer and wine are in the bathtub. I'm like, oh boy.
Love it. That's the
high
Big West for
budget.
you. That's the big. Well, it's a bummer. The Big West tourney when I was in college back in 2008, 2009 was at it was in Anaheim usually. Then they moved it to the Honda Center, which was way too big.
Yeah,
it was nice, but it was too big.
Yeah.
And then now it's in Vegas. I'm like, what are we
now
doing?
it's in Vegas.
The Big West, it needs to be here in SoCal because that's where most of the teams are, and no one travels to it. So you're out in Vegas with like 8 fans.
Crazy stuff. Of course, Long Beach State, where first Division I job for the great Jerry Tarkanian.
Yes,
went on to
Tarkanian.
UNLV. So
great
story.
Baby.
A great story I'll have to tell you off the air about that Coach Tark told me about his time at Long Beach State and a famous celebrity who was in the locker room one day. I'll tell you that story later. All right. We're going to close out the show here on NautZone. Do us a favor. Make sure you subscribe here to the channel. If you're watching us on YouTube, hit that notifications bell. We appreciate it. Be with us every Wednesday, 4 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Pacific. And of course, we'll be after the championship games this weekend on Sunday as well. So you can join us there. Also, check out all of the coverage of the NFL and other sports too, whether you're into baseball, football, hockey, doesn't matter, NASCAR, check out sportsnaut.com. Ryan, my friend, I will see you next time.
I can't wait. Looking forward to it. See you Sunday.
All right. For everybody here at Sports Naut, this is Scott Branson. We will talk to you guys on Sunday. Take care.